just finishing the setup for live.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Restart to Recovery, Reimagining Parks, Recreation, and Community Sport. My name is Krista Costas-Bradstreet, and I'm the Director of Policy and Partnership for CPRA. And joining me to take care of all of our technical aspects for today's webinar is my colleague, MJ Akonde. Before we begin, I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to introduce you to CPRA. So the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association, or CPRA, is a national organization dedicated to realizing the full potential of parks and recreation as a major contributor to community health and vibrancy. And next slide. Over its 60-year history, CPRA has been the national voice for parks and recreation, advancing the collective interests of our members. We're a national network dedicated to the well-being of people, communities, and the natural and built environments. And we provide services for our members and partners that cultivate dialogue, learning, and innovation. CPRA's strength comes from the collective experience, expertise, and network of the staff and board members from our 13 provincial and territorial association members. We also work with volunteers, government partners, and a number of allied sectors such as physical activity, sport, education, public health, and others that help us to make progress on our goals, and we strive to help them meet theirs. We have a virtual office with 7 staff and 1 intern. And as the national office of CPRA is located in Ottawa, I would like to acknowledge that CPRA is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Mohawk First Nations. We acknowledge the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and of the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and we aim to contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey we all share together. For those of us who are settlers, through our work at CPRA, we commit to recognizing and honoring the relationships between Indigenous people, their life ways, and their land. Last summer, we introduced The Bench, CPRA's online community. It's meant to be a place for the sector to meet, discuss issues, share information, and grow together. The Bench features a number of things, such as COVID-19 resources, which hopefully we won't need for much longer, and a number of other resources. A collection of events, which you're welcome to put any upcoming events that you have up on the bench, discussion groups, a portal dedicated to the framework for recreation in Canada, and also a portal for Parks for All, professional development, and we've just recently added a job hub. And then coming this fall, we're actually relaunching the Benefits Hub, which is a place that you can come for data and evidence that will help you make the case for the benefits of parks and recreation. And on a final note, we've just actually added a new discussion group for webinars, so you can post questions and get information on some of the webinars that we have presented in the past. So we really encourage you to sign up for the bench and share it with your colleagues so that we can continue to grow this community and have a richer discussion with all of us. Just before we begin the webinar, I'd like to encourage you to enter all of your questions into the Q&A box, and we will address them at the end of all of the presentations. And also want to let you know that we are recording the webinar, and it will be available in the next several days through either cpra.ca or on the bench. So I'd like to just introduce Mike Roma. Mike is CPRA's chair of the board, and he would just like to welcome you and say a few words. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Krista. On behalf of the board, welcome. It's great to have all of you join us, and it's great to see the participant number keep ticking up. I think we had over 500 people from across the country registered for this. Hopefully it's very valuable to you, and thank you for your support. Also, special thanks to our partners in this endeavor, Sport Canada, for their partnership and for their overall support. The past 15 months have been challenging for us all. Some of those challenges have been new, related specifically to the pandemic, and I think others have been amplified due to just the general state of affairs in Canada over those months. We're a national leader. CPRA is a national leader in the recreation and parks sector, and we knew we needed to do something, but we knew there's a lot of things going on over the last number of months, but we didn't necessarily know what to do. And the board wrestled with that and decided that the first thing that we needed to do was to kind of take stock of the situation, to understand what was happening in Canada throughout our different provinces and territories. And in doing so, we reached out to Sport Canada, and they answered the call. So Reimagine Rec is meant to, it's meant to help us understand what's happened over the past 15 months, to help us kind of understand the challenges ahead of us, how to navigate those, almost how to reframe those as opportunities. I think one thing's for sure, that Parks and Recreation has a elevated relevance in Canadian communities and with Canadians, and that's a great thing for us. And we need to make sure that we kind of capture that and retain that level of interest. The next slide has a number of faces on it, and I'm not going to get into a detailed kind of overview of everybody who's been involved in this, but I do want to thank John Frittenberg, who's going to join us soon, Joe, Diane, Brian, Larry, Pierre, all the people you see on the screen there, as well as their supporting cast. This was an enormous effort on all of our behalfs, but for sure the team that was involved in developing it. And I know, because I'm involved in some of that work in my day job, that it's hard, it's not easy work. And this was a labor of love, of commitment, of passion to parks and recreation. And all of those people are smiling on the screen, and they'll smile in the webinar. But I know it was not easy work, and I really appreciate, and on behalf of the board, we really appreciate their efforts. So I'll leave it at that, Krista, and hand it back over to you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. So it's actually now my pleasure to introduce John Frittenberg, who is the president of the JF Group and project lead for the Reimagine Rec project. The JF Group is a nationally recognized management consultancy specializing in the sport, recreation, and physical activity sector. Throughout his 35-year career, John has assisted municipal, commercial, and not-for-profit clients stay abreast of key trends while developing strategies for success. The JF Group's client list includes federal, provincial, and municipal governments, as well as national, provincial, and municipal sport and recreation organizations that operate facilities and deliver sport recreation-related services. So as I hand it over to John, I would just like to remind everybody that just throughout the presentation, please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A, and we will take a look after all of the presentations at those questions. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Krista. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for signing up for this webinar. We're excited to present it to you. I just want to just give you a brief overview of the leadership team that you see in front of you. Joe Dora. He had 2 decades of experience with the federal government, specifically with the Public Health Agency of Canada. Diane English, years of experience in the recreation sector in Parks and Recreation Ontario, as well as CPRA. Brian Johnson, my esteemed Western-based consultant friend and colleague who has over 40 years of recreation and leisure management experience. Larry Ketchison, after years with the provincial government in Ontario, was the founding executive director of Parks and Recreation Ontario. And Pierre Morin, who had decades of municipal leisure and recreation management experience before more recently going into consulting in the physical activity and leisure areas. I also would like to acknowledge the contributions of Monteith Brown Planning Consultants, the recreation and land use planning consultants out of London, Ontario, with 4 decades of experience, as well as PhD and master students from both University of Waterloo and Windsor. Their names are Kevin Wilson, Zach Evans, and Joe Miller. So before we get into the actual contents of the webinar, we wanted to do a brief poll just to find out where people are coming from on this call. So I think you'll see a poll feature that you can fill in, and we just want to know what part of the country you're coming from. So I'll just take a minute or so to let you complete the poll. MJ, I've just received a notice that they're having difficulty in submitting their information. Once it allows you to answer, okay, I'll tell you what, MJ, because we seem to be having some difficulty with that, I think we might just want to proceed just because we don't want to run too far over. Well, some people had an ability to submit, so it looks like we have good representation from across the country, at least from the people who are able to participate. So good from out west, mid Canada, and central Canada as well. Well done. Okay, so the next I hope this one works a little bit better. The next poll that we'd like to use is we'd like to know a little bit more about your organization and your community. So the next poll will ask you two questions, and we'd like you to answer both of them. The first is the size of your organization. In other words, your department or the number of staff that are at a particular facility that you're working at or whatever. And then the second is the size of your community. Again, just so that we can get a sense of the breadth of experience that we have on the call. So I'll just give you a minute to finish that one. I want you to answer both questions, please. Okay. Okay, good. So a good representation. As I suspected, we have large and small organizations, and we have a good variety of urban and rural locations, large and small. That's good. That's good. Okay, good. So we will move on. So what we intend to cover here today is information about Reimagine Rec. And I think it's important that you understand that because we have such a broad group, obviously across the country and of various community sizes, what we're going to be presenting to you today is information about the what we have learned and how you might use that information to your advantage locally, because we know that local solutions are always the best. So we're going to be delivering to you information that is specific to our findings, which were all fact-based. And that's, I want to reinforce that fact. One of the things that was the driving force behind Reimagine Rec was that we saw people doing things because they saw their neighbors doing it, and it wasn't necessarily something that they that might be applicable to their community. So we wanted to come up with a research approach so that we could generate data and findings that were that could be applicable to multiple settings. The other thing was we knew that other countries were experiencing or had experienced COVID, and were at a different state of readiness and different lived experiences that we had in our country. So we wanted to do an international data search to make sure that we were able to take advantage of the insights of people from around the world. And you'll see how that is reflected in some of our findings. So so we embarked upon a four-stage research approach that, could I have the next slide, please? This approach was undertaken in order to be able to look at different data inputs from different areas. So it basically had four different elements: surveys, scoping review, which is basically a narrowed literature review, key informant interviews, and promising practices. I'll talk briefly about each of those in a minute. All that culminated in a number of different reports. We actually have 400 pages of data and information that is available. We figured that it was a little meaty in order to be able to be applicable to every situation. So we've created fact sheets that'll be available on the bench following this webinar. And today's webinar is the first of what we hope to be several information delivery tools that'll come in the foreseeable future. So let me just talk briefly about each one of the different activities. First of all, surveys. We had a large number of surveys that were accessed, and each one of those surveys was reviewed based upon criteria, and that criteria narrowed the number down to approximately 100 distinct surveys. Clearly, there was lots of survey data that happened early in the cycle, and one of our goals was to make sure that we only used information that was absolutely current. So all the survey data that you will find in the various reports that you will see hopefully in the coming days and weeks has been generated since March 2020, and we cut it off at February 2021. The scope, we had obviously a broad range of respondents, 475,000 respondents, 31% of the survey information was Canadian. And you can see from the chart that's up on the left-hand side of your screen that a broad number of these surveys happened early on in the pandemic and it dwindled down as the pandemic continued. You can see that there's good representation as well about organizations, municipal, provincial, and national. The scoping review, we used the same criteria in order to be able to narrow down the number of documents that were actually analyzed. In fact, there was over 20,000 different relevant articles, studies that were case studies, I should say, that were looked at. This was then analyzed to come down to 245 different articles that were analyzed under people, programs, and policies and places. Now, obviously, there is some crossover between some of those. So that was very, very useful information. We also ran focus groups to get information directly from the practitioners across the country. There were 170 different individuals that were involved in the group, well, obviously virtual focus groups. 25 French language interviews were undertaken. We were very deliberate in making sure that there was regional representation. We also made sure that we tapped into special interests such as the Aboriginal sports circles, women's and girls in sport, big cities, rural communities. And that then produced a number of different needs and strategies and actions that came directly from the field. And the last was promising practices. This was, we like to call this next steps, because in many cases, these are new practices that have been generated as a result of needing to deal with new circumstances caused by the pandemic. We received over 70 submissions. You'll hear from 2 of those submissions today. We screened that down to 45 different candidates based upon a criteria such as, does this practice contribute to operational stability? Does it contribute to public health well-being and community recovery? Those are a sample of the kind of criteria used. I want to emphasize the fact that this process using a crowdsourcing approach is still available on the CPRA website. So if you're doing something, or if in the future you do something that you think is worthwhile sharing with your colleagues across the country, please take advantage of that. And it is available, like I say, on the CPRA website. Okay, so let's get on with actually what we learned from our various research activities. And as I said, I want to make sure that you understand that what I'm going to deliver from here on in the presentation is based on fact, and I'll try to use some examples of where I think those facts are actually applicable. One thing that we know for absolute certain is that the sector needs guidance. The sector needs powerful voices and opportunities to be able to share experiences so that they are learning from each other, as well as from other authorities such as public health guidance. Professionals in the field have been scrambling for answers as the facts have emerged, and we know that the landscape is changing on a regular basis, and I'll identify some of how that has happened in my other remarks. I think we have come to the conclusion that we're probably not going to get back to what we used to consider normal, at least in the near term, or maybe even long term. The changes that are going to be put into place are going to affect policies, they're going to affect facilities, they're going to affect programming. In the short term, for example, we know that you're going to have capacity restrictions. Those possibly will be eased as vaccination levels increase, but some of the more permanent things, such as sanitizing air, facility redesign, designing out pinch points, which used to be our control measures. All of those things are likely going to be longer term. So the sector definitely needed the information that we have uncovered in this study, and as I say, it's continuing to evolve. So one of the things that we do know is that recovery is going to involve a whole host of interrelated changes and needs. One of the things that I'm most excited about, actually, is I think COVID is providing us with an opportunity to do more cross-sector planning and implementation. So, for example, I would think that the recreation, community sport, and parks settings are going to really want the guidance and help across the sector. So I would like to see, for example, public health sitting at a planning table involving recreation facilities in the future. So I see that happening, or the need for that happening, and I hope that that is one of the positive outcomes. Can we go to key themes, please? The key themes slide. That's the recovery slide. And the key themes that have emerged have been quite significant. So, for example, we know that organizations will require assistance in building back their capacity. Now, this spans a number of different areas. Municipal recreation departments, of course, are going to need assistance to get the former capacity back. Their staff are going to require some retraining. We know that staff have been deployed in a whole bunch of different areas that was not traditional. So there's going to need for organizational capacity building there. But on a more local level, we know that community sport organizations over 40% of those across Canada are either bankrupt or hanging on by their fingernails. So those organizations are going to require assistance to build back their capacity, because when things do get back to a semi-normal situation, we need those organizations to be able to accept the registrants that hopefully will come back. We know that there's need for support and guidance with respect to facility transitioning. This includes everything from redesigning to mechanical changes to other things that may be implemented or required by public health measures. And we also know that there is changing preferences and expectations, which are going to drive changes in behavior of our customers. So we know that this has happened in sectors that are in areas, I should say, of the country that have already opened up. So we need to be sensitive to that, and we need to be able to change our programming or adjust our programming and our delivery mechanisms accordingly. So what does this all mean? Let's look at some specifics. So the following slides are broken down into categories. I'm going to give you a high-level understanding of what the category means and then some considerations for you. So for facility retrofit and design, it was really interesting how some of the things emerged to the top. For example, we found because of the popularity of parks and how many people have actually gone out and made use of parks that wouldn't necessarily have done so before, we found that the lack of outdoor washrooms, especially those in the wintertime, was a real big concern. In fact, one of the people at the focus group said that she found herself amazed that she became the commissioner of privies rather than the commissioner of parks and recreation. So that was a real gap that emerged as a result. We know that improved air handling is going to be important. We know that traffic flows are going to need to be managed more carefully. And we know that moving a lot of our programming to the outdoors will be an expectation of the people going forward, of our clients going forward. So let's look at some of the considerations of that. The social distancing aspect that everybody's dealing with now is important to recognize, because number one, it's going to change the way in which you deliver your programs. Number two, it's going to probably increase the call for more programs because you're going to have fewer people within a particular program. And the third is that lack of a reduction in registrations are going to reduce revenue streams, which of course means that there may be a need to do some rebudgeting. Indoor amenities are going to require more than usual sanitation, disinfection, and so on. Regaining customer confidence. This is a big one. We know that in some sectors that have opened already, they have opened up to less than capacity. In other words, less to the reduced capacity. And the reason for that is the consumers aren't necessarily comfortable in coming back to the situation. And a good example of that is childminding or daycare. When they opened up in various corners of the country, they had way more capacity than they had demand, because parents were just uncomfortable in sending their kids back. So that is, and you'll see that theme being reoccurring in some of the ongoing slides here. We also know that there will be the need to review third-party contracts. That pandemic was never contemplated in most of the contracts. Think about, for example, a facility management contract, who's responsible for revenue reductions as a result of forced closing. I know force majeure clauses cover some of that, but certainly not all of it. So those are just some of the overarching implications of all of this. Okay, when it comes to physical activity, you just have to pick up the paper in the morning to realize that COVID has really had a negative impact on physical activity. People aren't exercising or aren't being active as much in organized settings. And I've seen conflicting messages on this recently, but in the surveys and the literature that we reviewed, approximately 50% of former gym goers are either reluctant to return or said they will not return to their former environment. So that's not a very good situation. So we really do need to get people to feel more comfortable in coming back. We also know that people have told us time and time again, and there is evidence of all of this, that they want to be outside more. So I can see a transition from traditional indoor facilities to the outdoors, which has implications on a variety of different things. One of the things I meant to mention a little earlier, the pressure on our parks since the beginning of this has had a significant amount of impact on the way departments work. So it has caused control issues, it's caused maintenance issues, and in some cases, safety issues. So for example, in BC, they saw a stark increase in the budgets for, or the requirement of budgets for search and rescue as a result of people using trails that were unprepared to go to where they actually went. So physical activity has definitely been impacted and will continue to be impacted. We know that people are working out at home more, and that is something that we hope will, I don't think that's going to change. I think they're going to continue to work on their own and out more, but we need to find new delivery protocols to bring them back in. And the other thing is that people gravitated to individual self-directed activity in the outdoors, a significant increase in biking. You just have to try and buy a bike these days to understand the impact of that, as well as just walking. So let's look at some of the considerations. Oh, sorry, this is, preferences and expectations and behaviors. Again, safety is number one. The continued demand for outdoor four-season programming is likely going to be with us. We know that people have participated virtually. I don't think that's the need for that is going to subside. We know that since the beginning of the pandemic, there have been 72,000 fitness-related apps that have been developed. That's just an indication. So while you're developing your program plans, take into account these preferences and expectations, because you will probably need to include a variety of different program delivery modalities to meet those expectations. In terms of programs, I've covered some of this already, so I'll speed through it. Again, increased demand for outdoor spaces. People appreciate parks and recreation more. As Mike was saying, I think this is a huge opportunity for the sector to capitalize upon the momentum that has been generated that could end up being a potential. We also know that women have been impacted inequitably by the pandemic because of other duties that are their responsibilities. They have not been able to participate in activities as much as they may have otherwise liked. And we know that other disadvantaged groups, people with disabilities and so on, have also been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. So some considerations. In-person and hybrid and virtual programming, as I said, it would be very wise to consider this when you're putting together your program plans in a post-COVID environment. It'll take a while to get there, but outreach programming and the impact of that on using partners to become involved with that, and also the safety and the social aspect of it. In terms of technology is here to stay. One of our participants in the focus group suggests that municipalities have not been the greatest in municipal governments have not been the greatest in successfully using technology. Large centers are often plagued by challenges, registering kids for swimming lessons, for example. So we need to make technology much more user-friendly. I heard one webinar panelist at one point say, if it doesn't work as simply as Zoom, then they're not going to use it. So we need to make sure that we are using technology to the best of its capability and to help us do what we need to do. We also know that technology is being used to help with other areas. So for example, technology is being used for sanitation purposes. We know that technology is helpful in trying to reduce the number of surfaces that require being touched, and so on and so on. I think you're going to find that in some areas, you're going to find that facial recognition comes into play with respect to identifying people as opposed to having them check in manually and so on. So there is a challenge with this, though, because technology is expensive. And as I said earlier, there's going to be a revenue decline as it relates to the future delivery of recreation and sport and fitness activities. interesting survey of municipal governments. When asked what part of what you do every day is going to be most negatively affected by the COVID, the senior management people in municipal governments said significantly that Parks and Recreation was going to take the biggest hit. So there is an opportunity, I think, for us to capitalize on that. If senior decision makers within municipalities understand that Parks and Recreation is important, the consumers see it as important, they're telling us that every day, and you don't only have to look at a park to see the amount of activity that is happening there. I think this is an opportunity for people within the field to take advantage. Environmental cleaning, certainly we're going to find that there are new protocols that are required. We have already seen calls for new mechanical systems to disinfect the air. We know that design is going to take that into account to some extent by a larger introduction of air, fresh air into systems. That will have an interesting impact, because until such time as new technologies come to bear on this, you may find that energy costs go up as a result. So we need to find new ways of doing things so that we can maintain our focus on being environmentally friendly, while at the same time protecting people in the cleanest environment that we can get. And okay, so that's the end. We've decided to keep questions and answers at the end of all the presentations, so I'll pass it back over to Krista.
Thanks, John. And you're quite right. We are going to take questions later, but before you go, there were two quick ones I think you could probably answer. And one was around, did youth participate in the surveys or focus groups? And can you comment on the diversity in the respondents? So maybe you just want to answer those, and then we'll move to the next presentation.
In terms of the focus groups, it was primarily practitioners, so no, youth did not participate in those key informant interviews. But the literature review and the survey definitely took into account youth that were polled. So yes, there were inputs from youth. I'm sorry, Krista, what was the second part of that question?
Can you comment on the diversity in the respondents?
The diversity in terms of the people who were in the focus groups was, we made sure that we attracted people, like I say, who specialize in women, girls, and sports. For example, we did speak with the Aboriginal sports circles. We did talk to organizations that represent disadvantaged and people with disabilities. There was a great, in fact, best practice that came in from the Ability Center in Ontario. So yeah, I think that we did cover off as much of the diversity aspect of things as was possible, given the time constraints that we had for the implementation of this project.
Awesome, John. Thanks for doing that. And thanks for your great presentation. I think John could probably present for a day with all of the information that he and his team collected. And so really appreciate you being able to condense this into 20 minutes. So I'd like to now introduce you to our first panel, who are going to present the Swim Together initiative. Katie Meisner is an associate professor in the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies at the University of Waterloo. Her research focuses on the social impact and organizational capacity of community sport clubs. She is currently a volunteer with the Youth in Recreation Committee of the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation and is on the board of Parks and Recreation Ontario. She's an active swimmer and skier and parent of 2 young athletes in hockey, dance, and swimming. Erin Schmidt formerly worked in the tech industry as an engineer and project manager. She's now taking time off to spend with family and pursue other interests. Together with her husband, they volunteer to manage and coach the Woolwich Wave swim team in Elmira, Ontario. She's a recreational runner, swimmer, and ultimate Frisbee player with 3 children active in community sports, including swimming, running, hockey, basketball, and soccer. So thrilled that you're both here today, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, for spending time on this webinar today. My name is Katie Meisner. As Krista said, I'm a professor at the University of Waterloo, and I'm going to present today with Erin, who is a volunteer, an amazing volunteer in our community and the club manager of the Woolwich Wave Swim Club. We also would like to thank one of our colleagues at the Township of Woolwich, Jennifer Horndle, who is an amazing advocate for this program and has been very incredibly supportive of this pilot project from our municipality. Okay, next slide. So as John noted, and as likely we're preaching to the choir, and most people already would know, that women and girls have long faced barriers to sport participation, and the pandemic has introduced and amplified these barriers, given that women have taken on a disproportionately higher responsibility for care work and domestic work in comparison to men, and it has limited their access to both paid work and also to leisure pursuits such as sport and recreation. So we've been interested in how community sport and recreation can reduce barriers and increase participation for women and girls in sport. And one of the avenues that sport and recreation has not always taken advantage of is the demonstrated connection between physical activity levels in parents and their children. Rather, most often, many of us as parents are left on the sidelines watching our children participate, particularly moms. And yet we know that parents are busy, they're often working longer hours, and they don't necessarily have the time to dedicate to their own sport and recreation pursuits. Many of you can probably think of opportunities and times when you have dropped your own kids off or grandchildren and not engaged in recreation yourself during that time. So given these constraints that parents face, and that research tells us how important it is that parents are active too, we as sector leaders cannot afford to ignore those family dynamics any longer. And I think many of John's points earlier spoke to this. Instead, we see great opportunity to engage parents and their kids simultaneously so that parent health isn't sacrificed just to ensure that kids are active. Everyone, no matter your life stage, should have opportunities to participate. So this is really the concept that has driven this pilot program for us, is the notion of co-participation, where kids and parents can be active together. And as John said, the pandemic has brought changes in people's expectations. And as a sector, we need to respond in innovative ways. So Erin's going to tell you a little bit about a program that we've developed this year and studied over the course of the last year during the pandemic called Swim Together. Next
Great.
slide.
Thanks, Katie. So as Katie mentioned, to address these barriers, we teamed up to develop a new type of swimming program that we are calling Swim Together. So Swim Together is a co-participation model where mothers or female guardians and their daughters participate simultaneously in the pool. So each week, the women and girls were coached separately in their own lanes with their peers, and then came together for a fun swimming activity or game at the end of each week. Most of the women in our pilot program never had any opportunity to be coached in swimming. So we know it can be intimidating for women to start swimming for fitness. Many are unsure, for example, what to even do at a lane swim. So the 8-week pilot program that we ran provided instruction on swimming stroke techniques, helped build endurance, and generally how to swim for fitness. Our goal was to teach these skills in a safe, not intimidating, and fun environment. We recruited an all-female coaching staff, both from the University of Waterloo swim team and from the Woolwich Wave Swim Club. During our program times, we had only female lifeguards on duty at the pool. I worked closely with the municipality, as Katie mentioned, to plan and to run the program. It worked really well as a synergy between my responsibilities with our regular swim team program, because I could use all of my existing systems and procedures to facilitate the Swim Together program, things like registration. In particular, I was able to use our same return to sport COVID protocols that we developed for regular swim team, things like masking and distancing, entry and exit procedures into our facility. Next slide, MJ. Perfect. So as we developed this program, we found that co-participation really had a lot of advantages during COVID. Women and daughters could participate together, reducing overall contact for COVID spread and allowing for safer, increased participation. Being together really helped reduce family anxiety about return to organized sport. John spoke to that earlier. The women were right there to guide the daughters through all of the new processes in place for COVID. My experience with our regular swim team, where parents weren't allowed to come into the facility, I really saw some anxiety with families there as they sent their kids into this somewhat new and something they hadn't done for a while activity. The Swim Together program did not include any travel to things like swim meets that we would have done in the past, potentially. And this allowed for an increase in family activity time, which we found people appreciated. Social connections, I think this is a really big one. Social connections in the program encouraged accountability and motivation, really countering feelings of isolation during the pandemic. It gave the women and girls who participated an opportunity to interact with other people in the community, and they were able to do it in a safe environment. So I'll turn it back over to Katie, who's going to speak to some of the research outcomes.
Great. Thanks, Erin. So to further highlight some of these points and to just tell you a little bit more about our partnership, we went into this program as a community-based research partnership with the university, a local swim club, the municipality, and the moms and girls themselves. And we think that was really important, the coaches as well. My research area is community sport management, and it is such a privilege to find partners in the community that are actively doing this work as practitioners, and I can come alongside and we can use some research to try to evaluate the program. So we had participants who took part in focus groups and interviews throughout the program. And what we've got here for you today is sort of our 5 main big takeaways from this program in terms of the research findings. So the first was self-confidence and mastery. So one of the big takeaways is moms like being coached. Coaching was a really critical part of the program. It helped women and girls develop their skills and see improvement in their own abilities, which translated into greater confidence. And we were able to kind of build this out, as Erin said, using new activities every week, as well as some consistent activities in the pool that the coaches developed. The second key takeaway was that the program worked to develop physical activity and fitness. So women and girls talked about their fitness. They talked about feeling more active again, especially after time being more inactive during the pandemic. They talked about enjoying being active themselves instead of just driving their kids to sport and dropping them off. And that's what I meant by, I saw one of the comments in the chat, what I meant by parents left on the sidelines, right? Is we typically drive our kids to sport and then we stand there and lots of parents are looking at their phone. They might be chatting, they might be having a coffee, but they're not usually active themselves during that time. So women said, it was so great. I got in my workout while my daughter did too. Another benefit was social interaction. So this was an important layer in co-participation, where we found women who were laughing together. They were finding people who enjoy the same activities that they do. And particularly, we found that women enjoyed meeting others who didn't necessarily identify before this program as a swimmer or as an athlete. We talked to them about that, and they really said, I think of myself now as a little more athletic, but I never have been. I would have never been that person that would have just gone on my own to swim lanes. But they were with a community of others kind of in the same space, doing the same thing, and that really helped them get active. Positive role modeling was the fourth. So women appreciated the structure to be able to show their daughters what they were doing, that they were being active. I don't know about many of you, but I'm typically active when my kids are in bed, early in the morning or late at night when I head off to the pool or go for a run. And that's the case with many parents. Kids don't always see us being active. So this was a way to role model that to our kids. So I just want to read you one quote from a mom. She said, "I value health, and yet I'm living a life where it doesn't look like I value my health. So for me, I think the benefit is twofold. I'm a mom. It's really easy to tell your kids what to expect, but to show them what you expect is harder. So the benefit of Swim Together was feeling good about what I'm modeling for my kids. And I think that's pretty powerful." And then the last point was just that we were able to develop shared interest within families, especially with teenage girls. Sometimes there's some conflict in the home, and girls talked about being able to leave that at the door and just go to the pool with mom and have fun. And the moms appreciated developing a shared interest in a sport that their girls enjoyed. Okay, last slide.
Great. Okay, I think you can probably already tell from Katie's passion that we're pretty excited about the potential for co-participation in swim programs, but also in other sports. We now have the data from the research on what worked and what didn't work with our pilot Swim Together program. We've made some adjustments to that programming, and we'll be implementing these in coming sessions. In addition to swimming, we want to try a variety of sports and fitness activities that we think would be suitable for co-participation. We're going to continue a research component of these trial programs. We want to really use that to understand what sports are most suitable and or improve them in an evidence-based approach. Our long-term vision is to provide other communities with information packages and education that they can use to develop their own co-participation sport programming. Back to you, Katie. Last slide.
That's great. So we just want to wrap it up and say thanks for listening. We're really interested in hearing from others if you're doing a co-participation program. So if you are, feel free to reach out to this email address. We will send our slides to CPRA and they can distribute if you're interested. But we want to see who else is out there doing this in the sector and how we can build this model in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie and Aaron. That was a great presentation. And just wanted to, somebody had asked about whether or not the slides would be made available, and I believe that they will be. I believe all of them will be, and I'll just confirm with the City of Richmond as well. And I also wanted to clarify that one other thing. So both the work that's being done through Woolwich Wave and also the City of Richmond are examples, or two examples, of promising practices that were submitted through the crowdsourcing activity that were done as part of the overall data collection from the Reimagine Rec team. So there are many more that were also collected, but these were two of them, and we're really pleased that that they could be here to present them live. So thank you so much. So I'd like to move on to our next presentation, and that is from the City of Richmond. And we have two presenters. And so Magnus Sinclair is the coordinator of parks programs for the City of Richmond, BC. He liaises with residents and community groups to enhance and program park space across the city. Through his work, he has had the unique opportunity to collaborate with community partners, nonprofit organizations, volunteers, businesses, and other stakeholders to understand and strengthen the connection between people and park space. He's coordinated major park openings, signature city events, and worked to develop a number of policies which provide community support and access to parks and open spaces across Richmond. Ian Lay is the executive director with the Richmond Food Security Society and has been working in the field of community development for the past 20 years. He has 16 years of environmental education and programming experience that includes an extensive culinary background going back to the mid-70s. Ian believes in building relationships with a collaborative lens in mind to bring joy and meaning to food. He is an avid beekeeper, yogi, and rock climber living in Richmond with his wife and daughter. So thankful to have you both here as well, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Krista. That was really nice words there. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Magnus Sinclair. I'm the coordinator for parks programs with the City of Richmond over here on the West Coast in BC. And I'm really, really happy to be here today with Ian Lai, the executive director with the Richmond Food Security Society, RFSS, to tell you all about our partnership. And you all may be wondering, why is there a picture of a tall ship here when we're talking about food security in Richmond? This is a picture of the Kaiwa Maru, a Japanese tall ship that visited Richmond as part of the 2017 Tall Ships Festival. And I have a picture of it here today because it provided us here in Richmond with a really pivotal moment in the very early days of the pandemic. About a week after our offices closed, our team sat down virtually, and one of our team members had this picture as their virtual background. And it provided us with a really wonderful metaphor. Being an island city and on the West Coast, we love nautical metaphors, so it tied in nicely. So we have this ship, we have this city, and it's taking on water. And despite however many wonderful staff that we have bailing water, we need to find a new way forward. So we looked at this picture and we said to ourselves, we need to adjust the sails and find the wind. And, you know, Michael mentioned this early on in the presentation. Where are the opportunities? So we want to find where are the opportunities during the pandemic and how do we take advantage of them? So we started simple. What do we have? Kind of perfect. So we have programmable space, obviously being shut down, and passive space, things like our dikes and trails and stuff, shut down. So we had to find new ways to program these spaces. And one of the things that we landed on really quickly was our community garden space. Every year, the city plans on community garden expansion and for 2020, we had identified 2 new sites that would be able to house 28 new plots. Under direction from Mayor and Council, we quickly looked to expand these sites, but faced a number of challenges. You know, we had double the size of community garden expansions, so we worked with internal and external stakeholders, you know, 4 different parks operations departments, park planning, public works, finance, risk management, and the school district all came together to make this happen. Timeline, obviously, it usually takes us around 6 months to plan our community garden expansions. We had maximum 4 weeks. So new wind really means new time. So a number of the programs that we had lined up were sidelined due to COVID. So we found new time. Stakeholder ability to accommodate a larger expansion. Fortunately for us, RFSS is amazing. So we weren't really concerned about their capacity, but internally, we really had to be nimble and focused. Finances, obviously spending money during a pandemic is a big no-no. So we had to, again, be nimble and creative with finding funding for these larger expansions. And then lastly, ensuring that the initiative aligned with the 8 criteria aligned by our internal Restarting Richmond plan. And again, fortunately for us, community gardens, it seems, were really made for a pandemic. You know, they're outdoor, spaced out, they provide food security, a number of mental health benefits. So it wasn't too difficult to align them with these 8 criteria. So in the end, we ended up building 58 new plots, 40 in the Cook Community Garden area, which is in the city center area of Richmond, so a high density area. And it also has the potential to expand another 40 plots, which we're looking at doing in 2022. And then the Riverport Community Garden, so 18 new plots with a potential site addition of a fruit cleaning orchard, which we're really excited for. And it was a high demand area in a remote location, so it served an existing group of community gardeners that really wanted the space, and you know, they would use it to its fullest extent. And I think Ian's going to jump in here to speak a little bit about the community gardens.
Thanks, Magnus. Hi, everyone. I'm Ian, and I just want to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the ancestral, unceded, and traditional territories of the Hunkaminam or Musqueam people. We're merely settlers and stewards of natural resources, which we hope to pass on, hopefully in better shape, to future generations. So with the community gardens in 2020, it was either a lockdown, layoff, or find opportunities that we never had. So with the COVID coming on, we actually increased our team size with 5 new members. In terms of the community gardeners, this was one of the sweet spots where people could get out and stay healthy. I think it was just an opportunity to get out of that cabin fever mode. We had to restrict access to common tools. People had to bring their own tools, and that was a bit of a challenge for some folks who lived in apartments or didn't have access to a car. We needed to have physical distancing, so signs had to be made. The new builds were put into question because it was like, how safely can we build a new garden plot? Traditionally, we would build gardens like a barn raising. The whole community would come together. We'd create this magical change, but with physical distancing, we actually had to create family bubbles where people were socially distanced, and we ended up working and building the community plot from opposite directions. So then there wasn't people falling over each other, and there were physical distancing. It actually took less time to build with less people because there was less instructions having to be given out. And it was really important. And it's something that we learned. It was like, wow, you know, if we're going to expand gardens again, maybe we work with smaller bubbles, and then people already have a knowledge of building 1 or 2 garden beds, then they can become more effective and more efficient. So that was the community garden piece. And it kind of led to the food hub. And this is something that is really important. Magnus, do you want to jump in on that one and I'll pick up?
Sure, yeah, I think, can we just go back a slide there, MJ? So one of the things that we quickly realized when we were discussing food security and the community garden expansion with RFSS and the way that they responded and supported us throughout that process, it really allowed us to arrive at this critical realization. The relationships that you develop and foster with the people that use these spaces is a vital resource, especially during a crisis. Ian and RFSS are an amazing example of this. We've been working with them for over 10 years. And when Ian came to us and said, you know, the community garden expansion is great, we now want to cook 400 meals a week to help feed people. From our end, there really weren't many questions. We just said, how can we help? So Ian came to us with a food hub proposal, and we immediately recognized it as an essential service, but we were faced with a number of challenges, including space, safety, delivery, execution, and policy. Key to making the food hub happen was positioning this program as something that was core to what we do as an organization. We put people first. And so with guidance from RFSS, we found space in a Terra Nova. It's a park space that had a previously underused facility in it with a kitchen. So we quickly moved them in there. And then a really other key piece of making it happen was ensuring that this program aligned on administrative levels. So working within a number of different policies. I think we had 5 different policies that we sort of aligned it with. Unfortunately, there wasn't any, there's a major pandemic and we need food security policy at the time. So we had to sort of shoehorn it into a number of different policies, which was great. And I'll pass it over to Ian now to discuss the food hub and the delivery and logistics of it.
Okay, thanks, Magnus. So the food hub was a response to the closure of community kitchens and congregate meals and food distribution sites. There was funding available from United Way, and that was dependent on having certified kitchens. So the city has shut down, and I looked around and there were these assets sitting in the community dormant. There were unemployed chefs and food service workers looking for meaningful work. So I reached out to the city, and Parks Department is usually super responsive. And it took, for us, it was like, why is it taking so long for everyone to get the green light? But obviously there need to be all these policy levels that need to be checked. So while that was waiting for a green light, picked up the phone, you hit that telephone tree, and within a week, we had 12 partnering organizations looking for support. I had colleagues in the culinary field jump out and say, hey, I'll cook for free. I need to get out of the house. And we had to source donations. We had to source drivers. We had to develop a health and safety protocol. We ended up working in 2 sites, and we ended up collapsing into just one. But originally when we started, we wanted to meet the needs of 2 opposite ends of Richmond. So one hub in the east side of Richmond and one on the west side of Richmond, reducing travel time and pickup times for families and organizations. We ended up preparing plant-based meals 3 times a week. And since COVID started, we've distributed 30,000 meals. Okay, next slide. So this is a picture of the support and the preparation and delivery. The picture on the right is the Richmond firefighters. They jumped in because we already had a relationship with them. So none of this could have happened, and any of the work that we do cannot happen without relationships, and it takes years to build. And basically you start off with a partnership, and I kind of relate it to dating. It's your first date, second date, and then you get married. So, you meet these partners and you work over time to get these deep-rooted trusts and relationships going. So the outcome is amazing because we ended up with people who wanted to come work. We helped to employ people. The food hub has shifted from giving out or handing out into an upstream approach. So we've stopped, or we will be stopping, emergency food service and switching to an education delivery system with online video series. And we learned that the community is resilient. Assets abound. You just need to look and you need to ask. Don't build silos. It's not about us. It's about the community benefit. And the big piece about food security isn't that there isn't food out there. It's a matter of policy change. Food insecurity is based around the pay level and pay scales. So access to food is limited because of a bad or a very low pay rates. So we're here to support the community. I just want to thank the panelists and the organization for letting us speak on behalf of a lot of folks in Richmond.
And I think, can we just get the last slide there, MJ? I think just to wrap up, one of the things that we really noticed, and we really wanted to speak on today was, what are the outcomes? So, in Richmond, community groups and community partners are being more heavily relied upon to provide input and guidance when it comes to policy creation and program development. And our partnership with RFSS has been a huge part of this. And, this is just the beginning. More community groups are asking for more outdoor and indoor space to program, for programming, for education, recreation, food security, all of these things. And one of the things that I was really glad to see in the Reimagine Rec report was the pillars for action. And I think that this part of the report really crystallizes what we were able to do here regarding community partnership and food security, flexibility and innovation, and framing access and inclusion as a vital part of delivering these programs during a pandemic and post-pandemic are fundamental to progressing into the future. And moving forward in Richmond means park staff leaning into data and reports and the outcomes from pilot programs like these that say, look at what we, and when I say we, I mean Parks and Rec staff across the country, look at what we did with no preparation. And, while the ship was taking on water, we found the wind. 400 people per week at a meal they otherwise wouldn't have had. We rethought sport and rec and how it's experienced between parents and children in Woolwich. We built outdoor skating rinks in Saskatoon. We created visual arts tutorials in Sudbury. We piloted residential tree planting programs in PEI, and we provided people with a 200 square foot garden in Richmond to grow food. Thank you so much for your time. And again, on behalf of Ian and myself, the opportunity to speak here today.
Thanks, Magnus and Ian. And Magnus, you said what I wanted to say, only you said it better. I wanted to kind of pull everything together here in terms of the presentation. That was eloquent and accurate and awesome. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot, both of you, Aaron and Katie, for being panelists, and John for the presentation. I just wanted to kind of wrap this up a little bit before we get into questions and tell you what CPRA plans to do with this information and what some of the next steps are going to be. So there'll be a French version of this webinar actually in a couple of days. So if you'd like to participate in that, please do. There will be more knowledge translation out of this process. So for sure, the background documentation is going to be available, is available on the bench. There were some, statistics and some punchy statements that John made, but that documentation is filled with those. So I would welcome you to look at that, and hopefully it does help you move forward. CPRA is going to use this information to influence our strategic plan, the ongoing implementation of the framework, a lot of our hard work with the projects that we have on the go, or even some of the leadership aspirations we have around racism and discrimination and climate action and justice. We also think that this is going to help our partners. So for sure, Sport Canada was a key partner in delivering this. I'm assuming that this will help to influence where they go. And we've also been asked by a number of our other colleagues in government and other associations to present this information to them, including internationally, and some of the international relationships that we have. Probably most importantly, though, we do hope that this information helps you on the ground, helps influence your day-to-day decision-making, helps you get information, valuable information to your elected officials or your boards or whatever kind of organization you represent. Because at the end of the day, we want to, as I mentioned before, kind of capitalize on this enhanced appreciation and love that everybody has for parks and recreation, and make sure that we move forward, not backward, related to that. Finally, there is plans for another stage to this effort. I can't give you any details on that right now, and we still have to find ways to deliver that. But this is kind of the beginning of a conversation that we will have at CPRA. And we hope that you'll be along for the ride as we move forward. So I'll pass it over to Krista. Again, thanks to the panelists, thanks to everybody who presented, John and his team. Thanks to staff for setting this up, and thanks for all of you for attending.
Awesome, Mike, thank you. So what we wanted to do, we still have a few minutes and we wanted to take some questions, and I noticed that some of the questions have already been answered in the question and answer box. So if we have time, I might just ask people to, if they wanted to build on any of those answers, but there are a couple that have also come up. So I'll invite all of the panelists to be back on screen if you're not already. I can't see all of you. And this is one question for Magnus and Ian around, do you rent the gardens? Fees, if they are not rented or used, who keeps them clean?
So the community gardens are rented every year. We go through a process of applications, renewals, filling in empty spots. So we've never had an empty community garden spot. The price ranges from $20 to $90, depending on the size. And we've had great success. There's probably a 2 to 3 year wait list.
Awesome, thank you. A question around, and this might be for all of us or me, I'm not sure. So thanks, Rick. Will there be an opportunity to post comments and pose questions after the webinar? So I think a couple of things. One is we do have on the bench, we've opened up a new webinar discussion group. And what we can do is definitely continue to carry on this conversation on the bench, to be looking at sharing of information, asking more questions. And I believe all the speakers will have access and can continue to look at that. And as Mike mentioned, we are looking at other opportunities to continue to share information and possibly come back together. So I would just say for now, definitely go in the short term, go to the bench, go to the webinar discussion group and post your questions there. And I'll make sure that we're keeping an eye out for them and answering. And then as we proceed in the next couple of weeks, we'll figure out if there's an opportunity to continue to do this work together in some other forum or I don't know, another YouTube presentation. I'm rambling because I'm not sure of all the possibilities, but we'll definitely be able to come back to you with something for sure. From Gil, Gil has mentioned that he visited a program in Denmark of summer camp of 5 days, 4 nights, grandparents and grandkids, which was fantastic. So some of the activities were together and others were separated. And Gil had asked a question earlier on about, I think to Katie and to Aaron around whether or not some of their programming, if they had considered intergenerational programming. And I believe you also, Katie and Aaron, had a question about moms with sons, programs of moms with sons or dads with sons. So I'm not sure if you want to respond to that, but that'd be great.
Yeah, we've had a lot of interest in sort of doing this in different ways. And I think we're going to keep exploring that both in swimming and in the new Active Together organization that we're starting, and trying to do a little bit of a different model, but with running. And, you know, we've even had other local sport organizations. I've worked with soccer a little bit, and they have said, you know, we have all this green space and it's so close by. And, you know, probably many of you have had the experience of your kids, you know, in soccer, and we're all just sitting there in lawn chairs. Why are we doing that? Right? Like it just starts to, we need to ask questions about the cultures and the norms that we've built. And so I don't think it needs to necessarily only be for women and girls, but we did want to really focus on the barriers that they have had, the disproportionately high barriers. So that's sort of where we started, but we're excited to see kind of how we can take this concept up in different ways and how others will too.
Awesome. I just want to mention that Joe reminded me that the Reimagine Rec tip sheets will expand on the content that was shared today, and they will be available on the bench in the coming days. So please, again, search for those. And I think MJ has put a link in the chat box for everybody. So as well, check there. I think we have time possibly for one more question. The introduction referred to participants as customers, consumer, client, or client, not user. Also, there was a reference to the need for a review of the revenue model and threat of a hit to recreation. Is there a percentage of municipal parks and recreation facilities and programs that were free to users prior to COVID? Percentages that were free during COVID. Might this inform revenue and change policy for municipal leisure services in the future? So John, I think that might be a question for you.
So if I understand the question properly, the whole issue of revenue decline, is that the nature of the question, Krista?
Yeah, I think to see, looking at whether or not how many programs were free to users both prior to COVID and then during COVID.
Every municipality has their own pricing model, and in some communities, some programs are free, or some activities are free, and others carry a fee. So it's hard to generalize because there are different models from municipality to municipality, never mind from province to province to territory. But I can say that pretty much across the board, revenue has declined, even if hand in hand with that, costs have gone up because, of course, we didn't need PPE before, certainly to the same extent as we require it now, for example, or disinfectant and that sort of thing. So there is going to be a revenue decline. CPRA produced a paper back at the beginning of the pandemic in Canada. I think it was April, May last year, talking about the financial impact that COVID will have on the public recreation system across the country. It's broken down by province. It's not broken down by municipality, but people could do an extrapolation to look at their own local community. But it's not a stretch to suggest that revenue models need to be changed. As I've said to some of my clients, I think we have to start talking in different languages, because now that we know that the community is quite aware of the benefits of parks and recreation, instead of talking about subsidized programs, we talk about investments in programs. We talk about investments in community wellness, because if we continue to think about these programs or facilities requiring subsidies, we're going to continue to be, in my opinion, banging our head against the wall with respect to looking for more. But if we can start to connect the dots between spending in recreation, parks, physical activity, community sport, and so on, to the health benefits, which the public at the moment is quite receptive to, I think we'll find that the financial question, while it will remain important because we have to keep these facilities and programs viable, but the definition of a viability might be different. So I don't know if that answers the question, but there you have it.
Awesome, John. Thank you. We're at our time. There's been a number of, as I mentioned, questions that were already answered and that are in the question and answer. I believe that we can capture them and make them available, and I think they could go on the bench as well in the new webinar discussion group. So I just want to then again thank John for an amazing presentation, and our panelists for, again, excellent presentations and the excellent work that they've done. And again, just to reiterate, these are two of the best practices that were shared with the Reimagine Rec team. There are some others that we'll also be sharing with you, but really appreciate everybody coming on to let us know about the great work. And if you have great work that you're doing and have done as a result of COVID-19 and are looking at moving forward, please feel free to share them with us. You can do so again on the bench, I believe, on the website, on the CPRA website. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there will be all of the resources that went along with this project available to you, and the recording of this webinar and the slides. So I think I've covered it all. So again, thank you. Have a swell day and a great summer. CPRA will be back in the late summer, early fall with a continued webinar series. So we'll see you again soon. Thank you, everybody.